right, let's get started. So, I'm Joe Conlon. I am a solutions architect with Tierpoint. Who's Tierpoint? If you're familiar with Rackspace, Terramark, CenturyLink, we're just like them. Data center, cloud, we're just a little bit more fun to do business with. So we have 13 data centers, cloud zones across the U.S. We've got a number of them here in the Northeast, including Hawthorne, New York, which is the closest, about 40 minutes north of here. So today, we're going to talk about what we're coining as hybrid disaster recovery in the cloud, or what I like to call a pragmatic business continuity for non-trivial environments. Basically, when you're tasked with DR and your environment isn't just a bunch of VMs, you've got mainframes, you've got complex networks, how do you bring it together to actually recover? The dream, send it to the cloud. So I'm involved in a number of discussions daily with clients, prospects, people who are looking to provide disaster recovery for their environment, but without fail, encounter environments that include something like a mainframe. It was there before the current IT director was in place, and you have to just deal with it. Other things like complex networks, MPLS networks, people that need to recover into this environment. They're components to the disaster recovery project that are intertwined with the cloud and IT infrastructure, but bringing it together, it's not as simple as going to the AWS portal, spinning up a few instances, and bringing it all together. That's where the complexity starts to happen, but it's very common for an environment to have those different pieces. So the dream, everyone's looking for that easy button, just send it to the cloud, but you have all those VMs, you've got storage, maybe you have a specific storage platform you're using because it powers your application, and you need to do SAN replication. You know, that's anti-cloud if you have a specific platform. Complex WAN, physical appliances, maybe you've got a PBX that you've bought into, it's just part of your infrastructure, you have to account for that. How do you make that work with your DR approach? Mainframes. And then all those users, the people that feed data into the machine, which is IT, and the clients that extract or put money back into it to keep everything moving around. Those physical bodies, you can't just put them in the cloud necessarily, but they're very integral to the whole business continuity approach. So where do you start? Talked about why it's a problem, why it's important. So how do you eat the elephant? It's one bite at a time. Take my word for it. So let's talk about the methodology. So what I've found, and different people may have different opinions on this methodology, but when I'm mapping an IT infrastructure solution to a business continuity problem, I find that it typically boils down into these main areas. And as people start getting overwhelmed with business continuity, when you drive your focus back to these areas, you can start to get clarity into the project and things start to simplify more. So what does this mean? They're apps. So what are the applications that go into this environment? How is that value being derived? It's usually driven by those applications. Maybe there's an ERP solution, maybe it's an e-commerce site. All of those are applications. And then there's those people. Like I mentioned, those people are the ones that are either employees who are checking reports, analytics, they're inputting data. Maybe there's clients inputting data into your e-commerce site, an application. Those people are very important to deriving that value out of those applications. Now, we have RTOs and RPOs, which are sort of the industry terms for the recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives. That's literally what they stand for, time and recovery point objectives. So how fast do you have to be back online and running, and at what point in time do you need to be able to restore your data from? When you tie those metrics into those other key concepts, you start to lay out where your DR infrastructure is going to look like. That's your result from those components. Now, title is about hybrid DR in the cloud. Sounds like a spam email, I know, but bear with me. Hybrid infrastructure, as you start to look through that DR infrastructure, it maps out into some key buckets. Things like network, your complex WAN, your MPLS, global MPLS network, data center for your PBX, your mainframe, maybe your dedicated VNX that's doing synchronous replication with your production site. Cloud resources. Many people have cloud in production, a number of VMs running VMware, maybe you've got an OpenStack infrastructure. Cloud can provide a nice mapping directly to that. And then, looking at people, that's space. What do you do with those people? Can they VPN in from home? You know, here in New York, we all look back to Sandy, and there's story after story I hear where people talk about, oh, I went to Panera and tried to get on the VPN, but I couldn't even get in the front door. You know, or not the VPN, the Wi-Fi. Couldn't get in the front door. There's too many people in there. So people who count on sort of these secondary effects, they may not be reliable, and they may not be a reliable continuity plan to integrate into your overall picture. So continuity workspace can come into play. And then tying all those things together, you know, it's not just as simple as going into a cloud portal and spinning up a couple VMs to power that IT infrastructure. You have to tie it all together. So I'm going to walk you through my approach, given that sort of broad overview, my approach on how we at Tierpoint and I would map those requirements into a solution. So first, you look for those easy wins, things like native replication technologies or clustering. So if you have a SQL server, you know, why replicate a VM when you can use something like log shipping or mirroring, clustering even, things like Active Directory, it's built in natively. And if you haven't already outsourced your Exchange environment to Office 365, you have your own dedicated Exchange environment, an easy win is setting up a DAG replication to establish your secondary site. It's an easy win approach that leverages what you have in place presently. Now, moving down the line, start to look at those RTOs and RPOs. How fast you need to get things back online and to what point. Those metrics are going to start to drive what technologies you look towards, whether it's backup and recovery, which is typically slower, or using things like replication or other clustering methodologies, which can typically be much faster. Now, moving down that stack, you've looked at the application layer, moving further down into the abstraction layer into things like the virtual machine as a whole. So it doesn't matter what OS is running on it, really. You know, it could be BSD, it could be Windows. You're looking at a portable unit, and how can you protect those portable units? Nowadays, things with like VMware, you can use vSphere replication. With Site Recovery Manager, you can use Veeam, you can use Zerto, DoubleTake. There's a myriad number of ways to replicate VMs as a unit. And still moving down that stack, into the bare metal devices, things like physical servers. Maybe you have a physical SQL cluster. Maybe you have that dedicated SAN infrastructure that you're using EMC replication for. Maybe you have that PBX. Those bare metal devices, then those need to be attacked and figured out what the best approach is. So some of the questions I look through, can it be virtualized in a SAN? You know, maybe there's a vendor here who can do it, but generally not really. Things like, can it be recovered into a VM? Some applications, you know, it just hasn't been migrated to a VM yet, but that's on the roadmap. So backup and recovery can take care of that. And then other things like an apples-to-apples partner device. Maybe you have a specific backup appliance, and you just need to take that backup, and it's built into that software. It needs a partner at a secondary site. Well, maybe you need to buy a secondary device to achieve that particular recovery. Now, looking at networking. This is the plumbing that brings it all together. Are there any fixed carrier requirements? Things like, are you tied into a level 3 network? Is that a part of your global footprint? All your remote sites? Is that a requirement? If it's not, great, you may have some more flexibility there. But oftentimes, in a more complex environment, it tends to pop up in one form or another. And then also, a key driver around the networking is, what does your data change rate look like? As you start to recover into the cloud, that change rate is going to impact what capacity you need for the replication. And then, almost finally, people. Where are the eyeballs? That's a phrase we use. You know, who are the people that are going to be interacting with this environment? And those are the employees, those are the clients, anybody who would need to use applications that run within this infrastructure. And then a derivative of that, maybe going to Panera with a VPN, maybe that's good enough. And if it's not there, that could be good enough. But if you have to have somebody access this environment when they need to, you may need to have dedicated workspace. There's a number of different providers that do this. We'll talk about it a little bit in the next slides. But SunGuard, I think, popularized that model, the disaster recovery workspace, shared seats, dedicated seats. Still a component. And then finally, security. Now, I put security at the bottom, even though it tends to be a baseline driver. But a lot of times what you find is with security, it becomes an overlay for the overall solution. And by the point you've technically worked your way to, number 6 here, you've started to map out technologies that fit your needs. Security then, as an overlay, may limit those needs into certain areas. For example, maybe going to Panera for your people doesn't adhere to your security and compliancy needs. And maybe you do need, for a security reason, a dedicated workspace for those people. That's why we put it at the end, because you can start to see where things fit in, and you kind of filter through options as you reach the bottom. Okay, so let's map this out to solutions that we see. So take, for example, a production site. This is what your production site generally looks like, generic stack. So you've got maybe some remote offices, or remote sales office. You've got external users. Those could be clients. Those could be, remote users working from Panera. They're connecting in through some sort of network. Could be the internet, could be a private network. And they connect into your main office space, and you've got people at that office. They're doing their day-to-day. Within that office space, or directly connected to it, there tends to be a data center or network room, and that has your infrastructure stack, including the network components, firewalls, any security that they'd have there, compute and storage. Compute could be a physical server running bare metal. Could be running a private cloud environment with VMware, OpenStack, Hyper-V. On that compute platform, you have things like virtual machines, and those virtual machines then have OS, data, and application layers on top. And then down at the bottom with the storage, you could also have some backup repositories. And there's different ways that can lay out. Overall, it's encompassed with a security solution and management solution. So in production, the IT team is typically taking care of security, maintaining patches, firewall policies, that whole array. Management, monitoring is happening on the environment so that if your critical infrastructure is down, the business is impacted. So that's what production looks like. As you move into the recovery side, it starts to look pretty symmetrical how it maps out. You have similar functional components on the secondary side, and it's just the technologies that can be used to get them from the production side to the recovery side that are variable. So again, looking at this from a top-down type view, once you establish the network so that the secondary site can communicate with the external users that it needs to, and production side for replication technologies, backup and recovery, you can start working your way down with those easy wins, application replication or high availability and clustering. Work your way down into the stack, into the operating system layer. Using something like double take, you can replicate an operating system level information from production side to the DR side. And it doesn't matter whether you're replicating a virtual machine or a physical machine. Moving down, talking about Veeam or vSphere replication, where you're replicating the portable VM unit. That's the next component that you'd look at. And then continuing down that abstraction layer into just plain SAN level, you can replicate LUNs. I mentioned EMC, NetApp. Every platform generally has some sort of replication functionality built in. And then, of course, backups. If you're looking at backup and recovery, that's another solution that you can map to DR. And then, of course, in recovery, you have components like security and management, and those could be provided by you, the client, or through a managed service provider, such as a Tierpoint. And recovery workspace, we have up at the top here as well, for those bodies that need to have proximity to the recovery infrastructure. Okay, so let's talk about governance. We talked about the methodology, how it kind of maps out. Who's going to do all of this? Sounds great because there's different pieces, but you're already busy with production. All right, so taking a quick look at the landscape. At the beginning, I talked about those main buckets, including network, data center, cloud and recovery workspace. So here, public cloud, we all know AWS, Azure. Tierpoint has a public cloud as well. And there's also public cloud SaaS providers like Salesforce and Office 365. Many people use those today. And those are a factor with your DR environment. There's also private cloud environments powered by things like OpenStack, VMware, or managed private cloud environments like Tierpoint provides. And those interconnect with your data center pieces. Again, there's many data center providers. Tierpoint is the best. And recovery workspace providers, Tierpoint's also the best. Depending on who you use, you still have to factor them all together. Nobody laughed at my jokes, I noticed. So the way we bring that together at Tierpoint is through our dashboard. So as a client, you have a dashboard that funnels in your metrics from physical resources where people are accessing that data, as well as cloud resources. So there's cloud resource pools where you can deploy instances, monitor the usage of that, and how they're all integrated together. And then in addition to that, disaster recovery workspace, which we tie together, layer 2, layer 3, between our facilities to bring a comprehensive solution. And as an example, our Hawthorne facility that's just north of Manhattan, very popular with financial services, running a trading floor is a common thing that we would see in a private suite. All right, so quick summary. First, focus on your applications and people. Those are some key drivers. From those, you start to derive your RTOs, RPOs, so recovery time, recovery point objectives. And then you can begin to actually map that infrastructure and the technologies used to fit those specific needs best. And that's it. So, any questions? Great. Yes? So the question is, who are our customers? So for Tierpoint, we have financial services, healthcare. It's pretty much all verticals. It tends to be, it ranges in size, frankly, but it crosses all verticals, education. And the services, things like workspace, tend to be more popular with financial services, manufacturing as well. We're US based, but we do work with clients that have international presence, and then these types of environments for disaster recovery plug in as that US presence for those clients. Thank you. All right. Thank you.